In this lesson, we're going to be continuing on talking about different practices within the Christian doctrines, and we're going to be talking about the importance of the belief in sacraments in this lesson. So, within Christianity, the idea of sacraments refers to some acts with special spiritual meaning. That is the general, quite broad definition of the term, but is still a valid definition nonetheless. Now, according to the Roman Catholic Church specifically, there are 7 acts with this special meaning, with the special meaning of being sacraments. Now, these include baptism, Eucharist, confirmation, reconciliation, marriage, holy orders, and anointing the sick. So, it is the Roman Catholic Church, I believe, that has the most sacraments for their particular doctrine. So we have a number of them here. We have 7. But there are others that are recognized by other denominations. But for the most part, there are less that are recognized by other denominations as well. So what we're going to do in this lesson is look at how the sacraments are described, the importance of each of them, as well as making reference to the sacraments within each denominations. And we can begin by talking about the different denominations of sacraments. So, according to Protestant churches, as well as the Church of England, the 2 sacraments that are recognized as sacraments of the gospel are known as baptism and Eucharist. So, there is a significantly less number of sacraments when it comes to Protestants and Church of England. In this lesson, we're going to explore the nature and significance of these 2 specifically. Now, I am debating whether or not to do a lesson on all of the other sacraments here. Let me know in the comments below if you want me to do one in all the other sacraments. But for the most part, you ought to really have a detailed understanding of the Protestant and Church of England ones, beginning with these 2 first, and then if you want, go into looking into more detail with the others. So let's focus on these different sacraments. Let's begin with the Eucharist. Now, the Eucharist is the service during which congregations will share the bread and the wine as a reflection of the sacrifice of Jesus. For those who've grown up within a church setting, or maybe went to a church school, you should be very familiar with this particular sacrament, with this particular practice. Now, there are a number of different beliefs that relate to the Eucharist. So, for example, within the Roman Catholic Church, there is a belief in something known as transubstantiation. And what transubstantiation tells us is the view of the Eucharist whereby the bread and wine actually turn into the body and the blood of Christ, representing a physical interaction with Christ at the time in which you are consuming those particular items. Now, alternatively, Anglican churches believe that Jesus is spiritually present during the Eucharist. This is a belief known as consubstantiation. So we have 2 beliefs mainly here. We have the Anglican belief in consubstantiation, whereby there is a spiritual connection that exists when the Eucharist is performed, when the Eucharist is practiced. And then there is the Catholic belief in transubstantiation, which is the actual physical connection that exists when the body and blood of Christ is actually represented by the bread and the wine within the Eucharist. Now, you should know already that what the Eucharist essentially means if you are somebody who has a general understanding of Christian beliefs. So the Eucharist is important for Christians since it reflects respect for the life and sacrifice, mainly the sacrifice of Jesus. And it brings Christians closer to Jesus and obviously would therefore strengthen their relationship with God. Now, the Eucharist itself, of course, it dates back to the story within the Bible of the Last Supper, whereby Jesus broke the bread and suggested that this represents his body, and he poured the wine and suggested that this represents his blood. This was right before the sacrifice of Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus, something that we will look at when we examine the different Christian celebrations. So that's what actually the Eucharist represents, and there are a number of different spiritual meanings in which the Eucharist has certain ideals when it comes to the relationship and the strength of relationship that can exist between you and Christ. On the other hand, we have baptism. Now, the sacrament of baptism is the process that symbolizes a person's admission into Christianity. itself. Usually an individual will either be immersed in water, or maybe they'll have some water poured on their head. Again, this varies from different denomination to denomination. In some instances, they might just pour a little bit on your head. In other cases, you will actually just be fully immersed, dunked underwater, as part of the baptism process. And what the baptism actually represents, specifically the immersion in water or the placing of water over the head, is that it represents the cleansing and the purification of yourself from original sin. And there are some distinctions, again, when it comes to the practice. So within Orthodox Christianity and also within the Church of England, baptism is often done when an individual is an infant. So they'll often be very young people, often babies, baptized. I know I was baptized when I was very, 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 very young. And this needn't be the case, though, within these denominations. If you are older and you convert to Christianity when you get older, or you just decide you want to become baptized when you're older, of course, the church is not going to turn you down and send you away. You will be able to be baptized then as well. But when it comes to more non-conformist church denominations, there's actually an emphasis placed on a conscious decision by an individual to make the choice themselves to be baptized. Because when we do it within the Orthodox or the Church of England setting of baptism, it is done when they are infants or when they are very, very young, when they're babies. And so obviously they don't have the ability to consent to being baptized when they're very young. They can barely talk, maybe in some instances, and so therefore you have a situation where there isn't an individual choice to be baptized. And so therefore, when it comes to nonconformist churches, they place a heavier emphasis on this being something that ought to be a conscious decision. So baptism is something that ought to be done as an adult when you are part of these nonconformist traditions. Now, we have a quote here just to give us a little bit of an indication, a connection to the biblical interpretations of baptism. It says here in Matthew that as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened. He saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." So we just have a biblical connection that we have here, where we can actually draw some kind of theological sourcing for the actual practice of baptism itself.